So before we start making any small scale assets, let's have a look at the file structure and how to set up projects. So by default, Maya will produce some form of project, but really you need to set your own rather than have it within the Maya folder, and which can be a bit confusing really. So I'm just going to go to set project, file set project, and within this you can set it whatever you want. Effectively you are going to make a folder which will be utilized by Maya to save all your files within, and the next time you can just go to file open and it will automatically open or go to that particular project. So I'm just going to click on the desktop, and I'll just, for argument's sake, just make a new folder and I'll call it Maya projects. And within this I'm just going to click on set, and that's going to say it doesn't contain anything. Would you like to create a default workspace within there? And you're going to click on yes. So if we were to now go into that particular area, so we're just going to go to Windows Explorer, and if I just click on My Projects, you can now see you've got a file there called workspace mel. So if I just create a simple asset, shift right click, polycube, go file, save scene, you can see here it's automatically going to go to desktop Maya projects, and I'll just save this as test and click on save. Just hit continue. So you can now see that you've got a test file within there. So now whenever I go to open scene, it should automatically go to that particular project. You can also go to project window and you can define a project within there, and tinker with project locations, secondary project locations, etc. But generally speaking, set one project and save everything within there, and then next time you go to file open, it should always go to that project and save everything or allow you to open within there. So the first asset I'm going to make is going to be a very simple keyboard. The brief for your particular ICA is going to be Retro Games Room. More about that within the opening lecture. But essentially all we're going to do is create a basic keyboard based on reference. So the reference aspect is exceptionally important. We could essentially just say, well, a keyboard's just going to be a cube with lots of buttons, so let's now make a cube with lots of buttons. I'm just going to go shift right click, make polycube, and I'm just going to extrude this out or scale that out. So what I've done there is I've right clicked, select the face, and I'm in press W to translate mode. It'll just allow me to move it. I can now select that poly and move it like so, and get a basic keyboard scale, something along those lines. I'll select the bottom one and just push that up to there. So there we are. There's an exceptionally basic keyboard, you could argue. Certainly if I place a monitor next to it, or another object which looked like a monitor in terms of a cube, you would naturally assume that could possibly be a computer. Certainly if it was on a table, you would do. This is extremely basic and is adequate in some cases, but the whole purpose of this module is to take you to the next level of realism in terms of your blockouts and try and create something which just looks a bit more realistic. So again, we'll finish this one off in terms of a basic. So this is essentially ideally what we're not going to do. So I'm going to press Ctrl D, and that's going to duplicate an object. I'm going to press 5 to go into shaded wireframe. You can do that by utilizing this over here, wireframe and shaded. So this is essentially going to be the start of our button. So the few things to note, we can currently see the pivot point, which is this object over here, is all the way over yonder. So this is what we're going to utilize as a basis for rotating and scaling, etc. So if I press E, you can now see it utilizes the pivot point as a basis for that operation, almost like a hinge. So naturally, what we don't want is it to be all the way over there because it's a bit in the middle of nowhere. And more importantly, if I press R to scale, it's going to scale from that particular point, which is not what we want. So what we need to do is centralize the pivot point. So the way to do that is press the spacebar, click and hold, modify center pivot. You can see that I've set up a shortcut key. I'll explain shortcut keys in one of the lectures. So if I press Alt and C, it will do that for me. So in your case, you are going to click and hold spacebar and center pivot. And now when I press R, which we're already in scale mode, you can see it's going to scale that based on the center of the object. So let's just scale this and make the world's most simple button. There we are. We'll scale our touch down there. So I'll just assume that's going to be my button. And we'll just pop that there. I'm going to go to the top view, so click and hold spacebar. I'm going to press F to scale out. And now you can see where we are in relation to the object. So there's our keyboard, there's our button. And I'm just going to move this over here. So we'll have a QWERTY keyboard, so utilising the keyboard I've got right in front of me, let's take a guess. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 buttons there and thereabouts. So I'm just going to move this to roughly on the edge there. Go back into perspective mode, press F. I'm going to zoom out a touch. So if I press Ctrl D now, it will duplicate it to there. And then essentially we effectively need another 12. So if I press Shift and D, it will remember the translation and it will also duplicate it as well. So 3, and press Shift D again, and then we've got the 4th, Shift D again, we've got number 5, and we just need another 9 now. So press Shift D 9 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and there we are, we've got 14 buttons. So let's select those buttons. So I'm going to do a drag select over everything. I'm going to press Control and drag select the main keyboard without the keys. So this is essentially allowing me just to manipulate and move these. So we're not going to worry too much about exactly how many keys we should have because we are just using this as a basic blockout. So let's assume we're okay with that. What we can do now, you can press Control D again to duplicate this particular section or selection. And we'll assume these are the F keys. So we'll now move that to there. I'm going to press Control D again, move that to there. And now I'm just going to press Shift D. Well, I'm going to have to press Shift D there, but I did that accidentally actually. So press Delete there. Let's just select these again. Again, Control D select. And Control D select that one. I'm going to move that there roughly. Control D, move that there, and then Shift D will just remember that. So there we are, we've got a basic keyboard there. We want some form of numerical keyboard over here, so let's put another few F keys over here. So I'm going to drag select these four and Control deselect these. I press Control D to duplicate again and pop that over there. And now we just need the 3 keys over here. So Control D again, pop that there, Control D again to move, and Shift D to remember that translation. You can see there sometimes it doesn't work. I press Shift D, it hasn't done it unfortunately, which is frustrating, but never mind, I'll do it by eye. There we are, that'll do. So there we are. So arguably that would be adequate enough in terms of a basic blockout, but we are looking to increase your ability in terms of the modeling to try and create something which is a tad more realistic. So if you were to produce something like this, you could argue it would work. You know, clearly somebody was to look at that, they would say it's a keyboard, but my feeling is we could go to the next level of believability with our assets and make things more detailed. So the basis of that, you know, what we've done here is we haven't used any reference. So we've basically taken a guess in terms of what a keyboard looks like. And that, although it looks like a keyboard, it's not the right approach to adopt really. It will only end up being a really, really basic scene that ultimately visually is going to look quite poor. Obviously it's not good enough really. So let's just delete all that. So we're going to utilize reference, that's the key thing here. So all I've done here is I've just done a quick search for PS2 Classic Keyboard. If I just go back a few pegs. So I've just done a quick search for PS2 Classic Keyboard. I've made sure that within my tools I've got large images showing. I found this particular image over here. I've just right clicked on that, or I'll just go to view image on there, and I've just saved that image and I've just popped it onto my desktop My Projects. I've made another folder within my Projects, called it Ref, and I've just dropped that in there. I'm not even going to bother worrying about the naming convention on that. I'm just going to drag it in into Maya. So we're going to pop it into Maya, and that will allow us to use that as a basis to accurately model from. So if we were to go to View, and image plane, import image, and then just go to our ref folder or whatever you've saved that image and just go open. And if you look at this carefully, what it's done, it's put the image right at the front of what our viewport is. So that would seem logical because you would think, oh, I just need to put an image plane in there, but you can see it's screwed up, and that's not what you want to do. So the reason why that's screwed up is because we have been in perspective mode. You can see we're in perspective here. So this is crucial here. It won't do it correctly if you are in perspective mode. You have to make sure that you are in the front view to do this correctly. So just remember that. That's a common mistake. At least we know how to resolve that issue. So we need to remove this over here. So we need to look at the outliner in order to do that. I'm just going to go to Windows Outliner. We've got Image Plane 2 over here. I'm just going to chuck that one because that's one I made earlier. So what we'll do over here, we just got Image Plane and Image Plane Attributes. And I'm just going to press delete on that. And that seems to have got rid of it. If it's a case you're struggling to delete it, again, don't worry about it. Just go to File, New, and that will resolve the issue, I suppose. So in order to do this correctly, so let's just remember that if you're trying to bring in an image and you are in perspective, it's going to bring it at the front over here. It's not the way to do it. You need to do it in the front view. So hold up spacebar, left click and hold, and go to front view, and just go to view, image plane, import image, and reselect that again. And now that's brought in. If I just go to perspective, so spacebar, perspective, I'm going to press F, and you can now see, I've just zoomed into that with pressing F, it's now created effectively a polyplane with that image already applied, and I can also scale that up accordingly. I'm just going to scale that up. If you aren't in scale mode, press R, and that will allow you to scale it up. So there we have the world's largest keyboard, arguably. So we're going to utilize this as a basis. So we do need to do it from the top view ideally rather than the front view. So I'm just going to rotate this around. So I'm going to press E. And if you press J, it will rotate in increments provided you set this up correctly. So you see it's snapping to 45-degree angles. So I've just rotated that 100 or 90 degrees, should I say. If your rotate isn't working, you need to press Control the spacebar. You need to double click the rotate tool, and within this you have step snap, should I say, relative and absolute. If I click on absolute, it's set to 45 degrees. So set that to 5-degree increments or 45-degree increments, and then eventually, once you're done with that, click on off. So what will happen now is every time I press J, if you press J now, it will automatically go to the absolute, and whatever angle you've set that to, it will go to that. So essentially, now that you've done that, whatever you are modeling, you can always just close that down. Whenever you're modeling, you can freeform rotate just by doing this, and I'll just undo that. But if you press J, it will go to the absolute 45-degree angle you put in there and will allow you to snap, which is obviously very useful. So we'll do this as a basis. So the grid now is really going to get in the way. We don't necessarily need to have it shown, so I'm just going to hide that by just clicking there. I'm just going to go to my top view. So from now on, I'm not going to explain how to get the top view. I'm assuming you all know spacebar, perspective, with the left mouse button, how to get to these areas. So top view, I'm going to press F to scale that down. And if you look carefully, arguably our keyboard won't exactly be perfectly straight depending on the photograph. So we're going to have to use a bit of creative interpretation here just to make sure the angles are correct. So I'm going to press Shift, right click, and I'm going to make polycube. And I'm going to now right click, click on vertex, do drag select these verts. I'm going to press W to go into translate mode, and I'm just going to move these around over here. So what we're trying to do is create a box which matches the scale of that. So the thing to note is we are effectively now moving these verts, but we can't see the keyboard underneath, which in some cases can be problematic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on what's known as X-ray mode. So we have our object selected, we click on view and shading, and we can just click on X-ray. And now you can see when I deselect that, I can always right click, go to object mode, and that will allow me to just deselect everything. You can now click and you can see your object has now got some form of transparency. And to turn that back off onto default, you can just click on the X-ray again and you're back to the basic material. So by turning it onto X-ray, it's just going to allow us to see the reference texture underneath, and we can scale this correctly. So right click, select your verts, move this up. So just try and get your box to match this roughly, there and thereabouts. That will do. So we have some, if you look carefully, we've got some curvature over here, curvature over here. So that's the next thing we are going to tackle. So very straightforward. Just going to go into object mode. I'm going to press F, scale to that. I'm just going to go into perspective mode. Obviously we can see our current keyboard is a bit deep, so I'm just going to click on vertex mode and select these and move this down. You could also, as an alternative, just go into face mode, select that poly there, bring that up, select the poly on top and bring that so it's roughly correct. That looks alright. That will do us. Obviously in the long run we would find a side shot of that, and that would give us a better indication of the level of depth. But for the time being we won't worry too much about that. So we need to apply what's known as a bevel to these edges. So if I right click, select edge, and shift, hold shift down, left click, select that edge, and that edge, and that edge, so all the edges. That will allow us to create a bevel. Now that I've got those selected, I can just bevel those edges. So you can either just click once, press shift, click and click, or what you can do, so and press shift again to click all 4 edges, or what you can do is select one and double click the next one, and that will just go all the way around the loop and select all of them together. Or what you could do is go into edge mode and do a drag select in between them all. So I'll just deselect initially, drag select, and you can see there 3 different ways of selecting those particular components, and that applies to verts and polys and things like that. So now that we've got those selected, I'm just going to go back into my top view. I'm just going to zoom in over here, and I'm going to press shift, right click and bevel edge. So currently you can see yours values might be slightly different, so essentially we just need to adjust these fraction values over here. So if you just currently click on the left mouse button and drag left and right once you put the mouse over this fraction bit, the values there, the increments are quite large, so as a result it's quite difficult getting it perfect. Or what you can do is you can hold down control, and that will do it in smaller increments. So just need to put control, hold down control, get it to where you want, roughly there and thereabouts, and then in the number of segments just increase this. So I'm just going to pop this down to, let's be realistic, you don't want to be too high poly. It is just going to be a block out, but you want it to be relatively smooth. So 6 segments, I'm going to press control again in the fraction, and I'm just going to adjust that down so it matches there. Once you're done with that, just press Q. And then let's go into perspective mode, and now you can see that's now applied the curvature to all those areas. So our keyboard is starting to look more like the keyboard rather than a simple cube with lots of other cubes on there. Go back down to top view, press F. So we have some curvature over here, and we have some curvature over here as well. So essentially what we need to do here is produce some additional geometry to allow us to modify this. So we can see our curvature here is correct, but it's too far away currently. So all we'll do is just select the verts and just move these by pressing W, move them to there. That makes a bit more sense now. That's good. And now we need to increase the detail over here, so we need to in essence add this particular section over here. So the way to do that is we need to add some additional geometry. So I'm going to shift right click, go into object mode, and what we can do to add additional geometry, there is a few ways to do it. As long as it works, that's all that matters. So the first way to do it is what's known as using the insert edge loop tool. So the insert edge loop tool only works when you are in object mode. So if you shift right click, you can see the insert edge loop tool over here. If you are in edge mode, then you'll find that that does not appear. So just be wary of that. Go into object mode, shift right click, and you should be able to see it within there. So the first thing we'll do is let's just tidy up our scene. We're still in X-ray mode at the moment. It can be a bit cumbersome looking at when you insert an edge loop with the insert edge loop tool. It can be a bit confusing. So what you need to do is just turn off X-ray and just allow us to focus in on the shaded object. And this is where we'll introduce isolating an object. So Control 1 will essentially, provided you have an object selected, so if you select that object like so, Control 1 will essentially hide everything with the exception of whatever you have selected. Pressing Control 1 again will bring back everything on screen. Now this is a very useful way of essentially just working on the object without any objects in the background getting in the way and slightly confusing things. So in object mode, shift right click, insert edge loop tool. We're just going to go to the options with the square and make sure you are set to number of edges equals 1. So that will do. So now when I click on the edge, you can see it's going to draw an edge in between the other two edges over here. This works when objects are quadded. So if I now click here, you can see it's going to add an edge there, add an edge there, work perfectly fine. If I try and add an edge from here to here, which is what we need and all the way around, you can see it kicks up a stink and it will only add it here and not necessarily here. And that is because what we have here is what's known as an n-gon. So what I'll do is I'm just going to undo a few steps and I'll just briefly explain n-gons. So here is a classic example of a perfect quad. There we are, quad. We know it's a quad because it has 4 sides. So 1, 2, 3, 4, common sense, quad. If this was to have an edge in between, like so, then what we have here is a tri, clearly 3 sides. 3 sides, 3 sides, 2 tris. If we were to remove that edge by pressing Control Backspace, we now have a quad. So a lot of the options don't necessarily work too well on objects which have n-gons. So quad, we know has 4 sides, and n-gon, easiest way to think about it is has more than 4 sides. So any polygon that has more than 4 sides, you can classify that as an n-gon. In this instance, we can see here this has multiple sides, so as a result, when we try to use insert edge loop tool, it's going to kick up a stink. So the way to resolve that and try and keep our geometry nice and clean is to effectively clean up the geometry. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to essentially just select the top poly there. I'm just going to press delete, and I'll do the same for the bottom one as well while we're here. We'll delete that. We'll just clean this up to allow us to focus on everything else and make things nice and quadded and nice and clean. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to select the edges, but I'm just going to select these edges here and these edges here. So drag select there, and then deselect all the edges with the exception of these top ones. So you should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 selected, and obviously the 6 on the other side. And this is where what we can do is we can essentially join these together and effectively create a bridge. So shift right click, bridge. You see what's happened there. It's now joined them together. So we have a quad, a quad, a quad, a quad, and obviously a quad there as well. And we can apply the same principle over here. We can just press Q at this point. So we'll apply the same principle. As I said previously, there's a few ways of selecting. We could essentially click on one of those edges and double click on where we want the edge selection to end, and that will select all of that. You can do the same over here. So we'd have to press Shift initially to add that selection to it, and then double click with Shift again to this point over here. If that's slightly confusing for you, practice it obviously, but if it's slightly confusing, then just do a global selection like so, and then just deselect the areas that you don't need, like so, and then just bridge those together. So shift right click, bridge, and there we are. And now we'll also bridge this together because at the moment we have an empty gap there. So if I press shift now, so instead of bridging it again, the G key on the keyboard will remember the last known command or process. So if I press G, it should remember that the last thing I did was bridge, so therefore it would bridge things again. So if I press G, you can see now it's bridged that quite nicely. So what we can do here is we can just do the bottom as well. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select everything at the bottom. Just deselect these edges over here. And then this time around, we're going to use a bit of common sense. We can see that in fact we don't need to bridge things independently. We could just select everything with the exception of these edges over here and then press G and it will do the same thing for us. So that's removed the n-gons and everything is nicely quadded now. I'm just going to press Q to quit out of that. Go back into object mode, and now if I try and go into insert edge loop and click on the edges, can you see how it's nicely quadded? And as a result the edge loop has gone all the way around. So just confirm how many of these we need. I'm just going to go back into object mode, press Ctrl 1, go back into X-ray mode. So we agreed that we needed 1 there, 2, 3 and 4. So we've added the 1 on there. Just go back into Insert Edge Loop tool. 1, 2, 3 and 4. Doesn't matter where you put them at this stage, we are going to move them. As long as there's 4 edge loops on there, then that's fine. The other alternative to that is I'm just going to delete some of these edges now. So double click will select the entire edge loop all the way around. Pressing shift and double clicking on other loops will select all of those. Control backspace will remove edges and verts. Whatever happens if you press delete, then what you'll find is if you go into vertex mode, the vertices are still present. You can see them over here. So it hasn't actually removed the verts. That's not what you want to do. So Control Z that. So you need to press Control and backspace, and that will delete edges and verts. So now we're in vert mode. You can see that there is no other verts there. So it's deleted everything nice and cleanly. So as I said previously, there is a few ways of doing this. The other way to do this quickly is click on Insert Edge Loop tool, Options, and just tell it you want the number of edges to be 4. And agree with that. And then when we click on this, on one of the edges, it will just add 4 in one fell swoop, which is actually quite useful. Q will always quit out of any or any menu as such. Press Q, that'll get you back down to where you want it to be. So now it's simply a matter of just moving these to where we want them to be. So we'll just go to top view, and we'll move that one to here. Double click that one, move to here. What I'm going to do is I want to move it to, it makes sense to move it to this point over here, and that way we'll bevel this section over here. I'm going to do the same over here. Again, double click and move that one there as well to there. And now let's extrude these two polygons. So I'm just going to click on, go into face mode, shift right click, go into face mode, and press shift and click on the other face, and then press shift, control, extrude face. If I can press the left mouse button and slide this up and down. Generally speaking, I tend not to do that, to be fair. You can do that if you want to. I'm just going to undo that. Normally what I do is I will literally just extrude, press Q to get rid of that menu, press W and then move. It's 6 and 2 3s. It's force of habit, I suppose, the way I do. There is no right or wrong. As long as I've extruded it correctly, that's all that matters. I'm just going to move those to there. So we've gone back into top view. Now let's select the verts. So select vertices, select these two verts, and let's now scale these. If you're struggling to see the verts, you can actually modify the size of the verts. So we're probably advisable to do that. So if you shift right click, polygon display, there's some polygon display options over here. The one to increase the vert size is within display polygons, custom polygon display, and then within here you got vertex size. You can adjust that. I press apply now. Let's have a look. There we are. So the vertex size, I've set this to 10. I've clicked on apply, apply and close, and now you can see the verts a lot better. Otherwise, they will literally be two small little dots that mean nothing because you can barely see them really. So that looks good to go. So select these two vertices and press R and let's scale them in. Roughly there and thereabouts. That looks okay. apply the same principle to the other area. So I've just pressed Alt and the middle mouse button to pan across. I'll select those two verts, we're still in scale mode, and just scale them in. Don't forget, you don't have to be absolutely perfect. As long as it's there and thereabouts, that's all that matters. That's now, you can see we've got the basis for that. We just need to add some curvature on here, because at the moment it's a bit flat really. So I'm going to double click that edge, double click that edge, double click, double click. In the process of double clicking, if I double click that for example, can you see how it's not gone all the way around, it's stopped at this point over here. So I'm going to press shift and manually select that. I'm going to have to do the same for these as well. So press shift, double click, see where it hasn't selected the edges over here, and then shift click them as well. Shift, double click all the way around, press shift again, shift, double click, and then press shift and left click that one. So that should have everything now. And we're just literally going to bevel this. So let's just go back into our top view and just click on shift right click bevel edge. You can see now it's added a bevel on there, but our options box for some reason hasn't appeared. So let's try that again. Bevel edge, it hasn't appeared, annoyingly. On mine it hasn't anyway. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go click on the options over here, and this is one way of doing it, where you would adjust the settings on here. So I could change this and say put 2 on there, and click on bevel, and now it will add 2 on there. Or what we can do here, we've got our channel box and our attribute editor. We click on our channel box. There's options within here that allow us to change what the things that we've done. So you've got depth, scale, translation, etc. We've got the attribute editor as well. Within there, we just click on the object mode. You can see we have poly bevel on here. So within here, we can adjust the options, and you can see the changes take place there. So I'm not going to go wild. That will do. So I've just adjusted that to there. Let's hide that now. And then just going to scroll along to make sure the rest looks okay. So there's a nice soft curvature there, soft curvature there. Just zoom out, touch, yeah, that's good to go. Still a bit sharp around these areas over here. So I'm going to select that edge and these edges over here. I'm going to go back into my top view, and I'm just going to do the same thing, bevel edge. And annoyingly, it's now appeared on there, which is just weird, but you know, what can you do? It's one of those nuances. So all I've done is put a bevel on there. I'm just going to add a bit of curvature on there, and that will do. But you can see what's happened here. You can see how this one is perfectly fine. But if you look at this one over here, it's fine there, but it's gone a bit nuts over here. And that's most probably down to our selection. So I'm going to press Q, press Z, Control Z. Just undo that a few times. So what's happened here, this is again another common error, where what's actually happened is, if we look at this carefully, we screwed up at some point and we didn't have all these correctly selected, and as such it's not allowing us to bevel correctly. So I'm just going to go back into shaded mode and then fix this. I'll turn off X-ray. So we know that's okay, that looks alright there, that looks okay there, but for some bizarre reason it's gone a bit nuts over here. Not necessarily a problem, this is another, it's a good thing that this has happened because it allows us to fix things. So let's just now select our image plane, press W, I'm just going to move that down a touch, and I'm just going to clean this up. Just double click, shift, and then press Control backspace to revert that back to what it was previously, which now it's okay. And then I'm just going to reintroduce that edge. I'm going to shift, right click, insert edge loop tool. I'm going to pop an edge loop there. It still remembered the value of 4 from previously, which is not what we want. Control Z that. I'm going to go back into insert edge loop tool. Change this to 1. And then just select there. So you can see now we've added that edge loop in there, but it hasn't gone all the way around because it's an n-gon, remember that. So what we need to do now is just snap this back into place and then redraw this particular section. So the snaps are a very, very useful tool. We need to learn how to use those. So if you're in translate mode, and if I press V, it will allow me to snap to verts. So what's actually happened there is, if you really look at this carefully, what's actually happened is I'm dragging along this axis, and if I press V, it's going to snap to whatever verts I hover across. So if I hover across this edge over here, it's going to snap to that point there, which is exactly what we want. And now we can just use the cut tool to add in an edge. So if I just go to vert mode, you can now see the verts clearly because we changed that size option. So now we can just go to multi-cut and then draw an edge from here to here. Press return. And then we need to do the same on the other side underneath, but we can't see the underneath at the moment. So I'm just going to go into object mode, control 1 to hide everything, and then apply the same principle over here. So multi-cut, and just draw an edge from there to there, and press return. And then press Q, otherwise I'll still remain in there. So that's now fine. And we just need to apply what we did previously to this. I'm just going to double click that edge and that one there, and just go to bevel edge. So remember how we changed the settings on this, and now we know that that one there is going to be slightly different to that one there. Not necessarily the end of the world, to be fair. So just add another segment to that. I'm just going to add an additional segment to that. 4. And because we've had to do this separately in relation to that, and we haven't figured out what values we've used, it's not necessarily the end of the world, but this one is going to be ever so slightly different to that one, which again in the long run is not going to cause a problem for us really. If we were looking to do this correctly as an artist, then yes, there is ways around that to make sure it's absolutely perfect, but for the purpose of a game designer, I wouldn't worry about it. So now we just need to, now that we've fixed that, we're just going to go back in there, reselect these edges over here, and just apply a chamfer to that, or a bevel should I say. So we're just going to we'll leave it like so for the time being, press Q, go into top mode, and that's just give us a bit of curvature around those areas there. So you can see now, that's a bit better than just having a cube, a straightforward cube. Now we need to think about how we are going to create the keys and how to create some additional detail so it doesn't look so harsh. There's got some nice, you want some bevel detail on these edges as well. So we'll attempt to do that right after this. So if we go back and just have a look at the reference for this particular keyboard, you can see at these edges over here, it's got a soft bevel on these edges, and that's going to add more believability to it, and more importantly, when we pop it into Substance Painter and put some materials and textures on there, it's going to make things look far nicer than just having a straight horrible edge. As you can see at the moment, that edge there is not exactly very nice, so let's try and bevel this edge. So rather than me trying to do everything and it works perfectly first time around, I'm deliberately leaving errors in there because it's a good way to learn, and that's the best way to do things really. Otherwise what will happen is you'll become so accustomed to things working perfectly that when you do get an error you won't know how to fix it, and that's obviously not the best way to approach things. So we want to bevel this edge. It's going to cause us problems because of the nature of what we've done over here, which will make a bit more sense in a few moments. So initially what we need to do is, let's try selecting all the edges on the perimeter of this and then apply a bevel to that and see what happens. So we just need to select the top polys. So within our modeling tools, this is a good opportunity to see options within this and how you can select things within this. There's a selection constraint, and you can turn it onto angle, and we can just put this onto like 2 degrees or 5 degrees. And then this time around, if I press or into poly mode, if I select the top there, it will select the entire top based on the angle it's at. For example, if I select here, you can see it's not going to select everything. If I select here, it won't select everything. But the moment it's completely flat, because of the angle I've chose, the selection constraint, it will allow me to select the top very, very easily. If I was to turn this to, say, 60 degrees, then naturally, when I come to selecting these bits over here, you can see now it will select a lot more than just that one poly. So I'll pop that back into 5 degrees and I'll select that. And then at this point, I'm going to turn that off now. If you leave that off, then things will work correctly after this. If not, then when you start selecting polys again, you forget that you've turned on a selection constraint. You'll already confuse yourself and wonder what's going on. Why can't I select just one poly? So I've turned selection constraint off. So we need to, at this point, convert this polygon selection into the edge perimeter. So Control, right click, two edges, edge perimeter. You can see that's just going to select the entire edge loop all the way around. So the reason why you would do it that way, seems a bit long-winded, is because if you try it the other way, so I'm just going to go back into edge mode and just press W. If I try double clicking on this, can you see how it's not looping all the way around? It'll loop to a certain point and then stop. So I could just do, a double click on there, press shift, double click, press shift, double click and go all the way around. But then I'd have to check to make sure that I've selected every single edge, and that can be a bit cumbersome. So this way, just selecting via selection constraint to the top and then two edges, edge perimeter, I think in my opinion is quicker. Turn that off. So now let's try beveling this. So bevel edge, and I'm just going to adjust that. So it's not allowing me to go beyond that value, so I'm going to type a value of 3 in there, possibly 5. There we go. That's actually worked out better than I thought it was going to work out, to be fair. Sometimes it can produce some erroneous results and there's a way around that if it does. So that's got a nice bevel on there. So let's just adjust the number of segments. The number of segments to 4. Yeah, that looks perfectly fine to me. Go back into object mode and now you can see we've got a nice soft bevel all the way along our keyboard. So we need to apply the same principle to the one underneath. The frustrating thing is that sometimes, remembering the bevel values, because obviously we need to apply it to the bit underneath. If you forget the bevel values in this, then suddenly, you might end up with a different bevel look over here. So they just need to be slightly wary of that. So I'm going to press Control 1. I want to do exactly what I did previously. I'm going to go to poly mode, select that one. We've already turned off our constraint. Turn it back to angle. Select that. Entire bottom, select off. The other way around that is essentially, if I just go into front mode, I could just do a selection based on here. So drag select there, which will obviously in perspective mode you can now see it select everything. So back into front, and then deselect with Control, left click, and then deselect the sides, and that way we should just have the bottom. So two ways of selecting. Again, Control, two edges, edge perimeter, and then Shift right click, bevel edge. So remember we had a value of 5 in here, I believe, and then we had 4 segments in here. So I'm just going to type that in rather than manually do that. So that looks good to go. Press Q to quit. And there we've got a relatively complex shape with some nice detailing that's certainly a lot better than that bog standard cube we had previously. So now would be a good time to save your work. So press Ctrl S and make sure you save that somewhere appropriately within your project. It should save it within the scenes, to be fair. Just press Ctrl S and then just give it a name, and then that's now saved. So that will do as a basis. We just need to add some keys in there now. I'm going to press Ctrl 1 to go back into non-isolated mode, and I'm going to press X-ray again. So shading, X-ray, and then just go back down to my top view. So effectively we need to create some buttons now. So we just need to get a better understanding of the shape of some of these buttons. So let's have a look. So this is where what I'm trying to do is understand the shape of the actual buttons themselves. Oh, here we are. So this gives us a good indication, yeah. So it's obviously got some slight curvature in there, and then some curvature on the edges as well, which should be straightforward to do. So what we'll do now is we'll just make a simple cube. So with nothing selected, make sure nothing is selected, just essentially make sure you're in object mode. So you can just go in object mode and then just deselect everything like so. Shift, right click and polycube. This is going to be the start of our wonderful button. So I'm going to scale that down so it's there and thereabouts. I'm still in top view at this point. I'm just going to scale it so it just matches the top there and thereabouts. It doesn't have to be perfect. Don't forget, you are not a modeler and a game artist, so we're not looking for extreme accuracy over here. It just needs to be a rough indication of what that object is, and that's more than adequate for the needs of a game artist. So this is going to be the start of our button, and the button seems to expand out at the bottom. So I'm just going to select the poly at the bottom, press R, and just scale that up a touch like so. And then we know that the edges are beveled. All the edges are beveled, come to think about it. We'll worry about that in a few moments. We need to add some level of curvature over here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go into object mode, go to multi-cut, and this time round with multi-cut, if I press Control, it will allow me to just draw in without pressing the mouse button. Just play around with this tool. You can just hover over and it will just let you decide where you want to put a loop, and then you press the left mouse button and it will cut one in like so. But that's not what we want to do in this case. I'm going to go back into object mode. I'm going to go insert edge loop tool, and this time around I'm going to say put a value of maybe we'll try 3. No, we'll make it relatively detailed. Number of edge loops 5, and then I'm just going to click on there, and that's just going to add. I'll just press Q now to get close this menu. So that's now going to add some curvature on here, or not curvature, but some edge loops, so we can essentially create some level of curvature in the middle over here. And that's what we're trying to do right now. So here is where we're going to use the lattice tool. So what we'll do is just select these faces. So with those faces selected, we're going to go to deform and lattice, and this time I'm just going to click on the square for the options. I'm just going to make sure that my settings are correct. So put the divisions to something like 3 by 3 by 3, local divisions 6 by 6. Just essentially make sure yours corresponds with this, and just click on Save Settings. So I'm just going to go Create, and what you'll see now is it will allow you to create essentially a small lattice structure 3 by 3, which will control the curvature of this particular poly object. So if I right click, go to lattice point, if I just select this and I move this, can you see how it's moving and allowing me to add detail where I need to add detail, which is very useful. So by selecting just the internal bit over here, so just these 3, I'm just going to move this down, and you can see we can produce a nice bit of curvature for our button. So not too extreme, just keep it subtle. Something along those lines will do. There we are, that's perfect. And then I'm just going to go back into object mode, press W. So now we've added our lattice to it, but we need to get rid of the lattice now. So we just need to delete the history on this. So this is a good opportunity to freeze transformations and delete history. So freeze transformations will essentially zero out any transformations that have been made to it, and the history is Maya's way of keeping track of what you've done to your object in terms of bevels, extrusions, etc. And once you delete the history, it will revert everything back to just the object with no history whatsoever. So we're just going to go to Edit, Delete All by Type, History, and that will now remove the lattice. We're still in X-ray mode at the moment, so I'm just going to select these 2 objects, get out of X-ray mode, and now you can see we should have some nice soft curvature. And we know each of our buttons effectively needs to have a nice beveled edge, so I'm just going to Shift double click, Shift double click, Shift double click, and select these 4 edges as well. So that one, that one, that one, and that one. I'm going to put a bevel on here. So Shift right click, bevel edge, and you don't want it too extreme, relatively soft I suppose. And again, a value 4 will more than meet our requirements. So there's a nice detailed button. Press 5, have a look at your button, amaze yourself. Wow. there's our button, all good to go. So now we just need to go back into X-ray mode. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back into X-ray mode, go back into my top view, and now you can see we've got our wonderful button in place. I'm just going to move it roughly in place, there and thereabouts. And let's think about duplicating this numerous times, etc., etc. We do have a gap. You can see there's an obvious gap where the buttons obviously fit inside of. That would make sense that we put ours in there as well. So we could try and do that after this, I suppose. In some ways, you don't necessarily have to do so, because again, we are looking to have something which is detailed, but not the most accurate model in terms of the amount of detail, purely because of the fact that you, as a designer, don't have you don't necessarily need to do that. You are just looking to produce something which is detailed, sufficiently detailed so it looks reasonable, clearly identifies it to whatever asset it may be, and ultimately you would give this to a game artist who would go away and he would make this obviously extremely detailed. So he'd cut all the edges in there, all the holes in for these buttons, etc. But I think that's slightly beyond the scope of this tutorial at the moment. And I'll explain exactly why once we start doing the lectures themselves. I'm just going to quickly save that. So I'm in top mode. I'm going to centralize a pivot point. So modify center pivot, and then press W. So make sure you've got your button selected when you do that. And then I'm just going to duplicate that, Control D, so move it into place roughly there. And I will now duplicate that again, Control D to there. And then just press Shift D once. Oh, annoyingly it hasn't worked, which is really annoying to be fair. So at this point over here, if I press Control D into there, if I press Shift D now it's worked, which is really annoying. I'm not quite sure why that's happening. I'm going to press Control D, duplicate that to this point over here. In fact, we don't even need to do that really. Now that these buttons are correct, and we've got another sequence of 4 and 4, we'll just press Control D, move these to here, and then Control D again, just zoom out a touch, and then move these to there. There we go. So now let's create the rest of these buttons. I'm going to press Control D and move this one to here. Control D. There's a lot of duplicating at this point. Control D again to there, and then press Shift D. Shift D, D. We're slightly out of sync now. If you look carefully, we're slightly out of sync. But don't worry about it. It's not necessarily problematic, to be fair. And that's because there is some large gaps in here, and that's primarily down to the angle at which this has been taken at. So the actual photo itself isn't a pure orthographic view, so naturally there's going to be some differentiation here. So we need to have, let me guess, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right. I'm just going to press Shift D, fill the hole to that point there. So that's now created multiple buttons to there. This particular button at the backspace bit, we know the backspace button is much larger, so right click, go into vert mode. I'm going to select all these loops like so, and I'm just going to move these to fill. And now you can see, if we just go into that particular section over here, we can now see that that particular button is much larger. The only thing to take into account is what's happened is, because we've got some curvature on there, now the curvature of this is a bit screwed at the moment, but that's not necessarily the end of the world. We'll just shift this so it still looks reasonably okay. So I'm just going to just redistribute some of this manually by eye. That will do. In the long run, if we were looking to do this perfectly, then yes, we would redo the process with an FFD, but we don't need to in this instance. So there's our large button. Go back in top view, press F, And let's just duplicate all this around and make it another set of buttons. So what appears to be a relatively straightforward and simple object, in many ways, is not necessarily the case here. There's still a level of complexity here. So press Ctrl D again and move it to that point there. Press Ctrl D again, move it to that point there. Just shift this along. Great stuff. So that one there, just duplicate that one to there. This button appears to be ever so slightly larger. So this time around, I'm just going to scale it with R. And that will do. So to be fair, I might be better off scaling these, to be fair. I'll just scale them like so. The only downside with scaling them is the bevel itself gets scaled as well. Not necessarily the end of the world, to be fair. And in fact, I think that's probably the best option over here. I'm just going to select that one now, move it to the center, roughly down thereabouts, and again just scale. That will do. And with these two buttons, I'm just going to press Ctrl D and then just duplicate them and move them to there. So that tab button and the caps lock button, certainly the caps lock button needs to be scaled down. So I'm just going to press R and scale that down to there. So slowly but surely we are building up our particular asset. So the shift button, I'm assuming, is the same size on the other side. Or is it? No, it's not. So just scale this. You can fast forward all this if you want. Essentially all I'm doing is just deleting all the buttons. So deleting all the buttons, just duplicating the buttons and moving them around to fill all the other gaps. So just do that in any which way you see, which feels right for you. So there we are. Scale, duplicate, scale, duplicate. Now we've got the large spacebar button. This time I'm just going to grab those verts, just increase that, and then just be slightly wary of scaling this one because obviously you can see there it's going to cause a slight issue. So what we need to do here is apply the approach of selecting all the end verts, move them to the end, do the same on the other side, move these roughly in the middle, and then scale these like so. Let's just have a look at that in perspective mode. Yeah, that will do us. So our keyboard is slowly but surely taking shape. Just cancel that. Let's just save our work again to play it safe. Aha! I'm glad this has happened because this is another common error. So Maya's essentially crashed basically. So I've lost all my, well, potentially lost all the buttons we've made. So it's a good thing this has happened because again this is very, very common. So the way to resolve this is just press Ctrl S on numerous occasions. Yeah, sometimes it will just crash for no apparent reason. There's no relative complexity on these assets, but regardless, it will kick up a stink. So I'm just going to basically pause the video and load up Maya. So I've loaded up my file again, and because we hadn't saved it, stupidity on my part really. Although I could strongly argue it's Maya's fault for being a bit turd, but never mind. You can see now that we've now in a scenario where I've lost all those buttons that I've made. So what I'll do is I'll just pause it, and within a few moments I'll try and get back to the point where all the buttons are done. So essentially, duplicate all your buttons and match whatever you can see on here, and then we should be good to go. So I'll pause the video, and the next time you see it, it'll all be done. So after a few minutes, I've managed to get all the buttons back in place, and I've saved that as well, just to play ultra safe. Right, so now we've got all our buttons in place. It's simply a matter of tidying up the file, really. So let's just remove our X-ray completely. We'll need to select everything. Just make sure X-ray is off and make sure you're in shaded mode with 5. We can now see we've got our nicely detailed keyboard there, which is obviously again so much better than that bog standard tat cube we had earlier on. That looks okay. You could go to the next level of detail and cut in some of those holes in there. Again, it would improve the aesthetics, but it's not really the role of a designer to go to that level of detail. So that's sufficient enough. I'm going to press Ctrl S now. Learn from my experience, save it continuously. Let's just have a look at some reference again. Get an indication of there seems to be some element of change over here in terms of the angle. So that's something that we possibly should investigate. So I'm going to use my lattice again to do that. So I'm going to select the object, spacebar, deform, lattice. I'm just going to go to my options. I'm just going to turn this to 1 by 1 by 1. Click on create. Oh, it can't be less than 2. My fault. 2 by 2 by 2. And click on create. I'm going to right click, go to lattice point, and just select these two components. So just these two. And then we should be able to just move this up like so. And that looks okay. Then it's simply a matter of adjusting the buttons to match that as well. So we know that once we've done the lattice, we'll need to delete the history on top of that in order to get rid of that lattice. So edit, delete all by type, history, Control S, made a change. And now from the side view or the right view, just go in there and modify this now. So that's the current height of the buttons. Obviously we'll just need to stagger this somewhat. Now let's have a look. That's 5, and there we are. That's now staggered. Let's go to the right view again. These are the lower buttons, I suppose. No, these ones here, the higher ones. Just adjust these a touch. Again, you don't need to worry too much about being that accurate. As long as it looks reasonably right, that's okay. So there is arguably our finished completed keyboard. Hopefully we've learned quite a bit in terms of basic modeling and how having that basic modeling skill set can make such a significant improvement in terms of the aesthetics of whatever asset you are making. Boxes and cubes and cylinders and spheres at this stage really do need to be worked into to produce an asset which is clearly more identifiable. So the next step is going to be compiling the scene objects together into something which makes sense and essentially unwrapping it. So unwrapping is something that most students struggle with. I find it remarkably straightforward and very, very simple. So I'll try and break it down into the most simple way possible when I do this particular tutorial. So there's our keyboard. So in the next tutorial we'll look at cleaning up the scene and starting the unwrap process.